A Small Furry Prayer, Dog Rescue and the Meaning of Life, by Stephen Kotler. Narrated by Kevin Foley. Copyright 2010 by Stephen Kotler. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Bloomsbury, USA, and was produced in the year 2010 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Preface. It is cold night and dark skies, and I am sitting in an old rocking chair on the back porch of a small adobe in the mountains of northern New Mexico, watching the moon rise through the slats of a dilapidated barn and trying to make sense of the dying. Inside the house, my wife is asleep, as are most of the dogs. People like to ask how many we have, and after exploring other options, I've come to understatement as the best approach. 637 is what I usually say. You know, give or take. The real number seems closer to 18, but this is tentative supposition based on indirect evidence. How much room there is in the bed at night, the timbre of the barking when the neighbors let their horses out to pasture, the amount of fecal matter found in the morning on pea pads set out the evening prior for those too young or too old to wait. Tentative supposition, that is, because once the dying started, I lost all desire to count. I have completely lost track of time as well. My guess is it's April 2008, but it's mostly a guess. Later I will realize this is one of the advantages to sitting Shiva, the Jewish rite of mourning, where tradition dictates 7 days for the process. Without any similar ritual for animals, grief has no anchor, and no barrier. It can last a week, a month, perhaps it will never end. No relatives fly in from far away to cook meals, no friends drive through the night to attend the service. There's no one to bring me a tumbler of whiskey, none to quietly let me know when I've had too much. Definitely not my wife. When we first met, she used to say that the trouble with us is that when we're alone together, there's no adult in the room. It was funny then, and lately I miss those days. Scientists who study what is now known as companion animal bereavement often point out that the grief following the death of a pet can be far worse than that of a person, even if that person is a close friend or family member. Psychologist Lori Green, the author of Saying Goodbye to the Pet You Love, co-founder of the San Diego County Pet Bereavement Program, and an internationally recognized expert on the subject, once told me this is why vets have such a high suicide rate. Another is that the bereavement is frequently compounded by the facts of euthanasia and the guilt that often follows. Personally, because of the unusual circumstances that surround the dogs in my care, I have not felt that particular regret, though what was true for bluesman Kansas Joe McCoy in 1929 remains so today. If it keeps on raining, levee's going to break. By now, perhaps you have come to understand what you are getting. You are getting a guy who placed a bet he could not cover, someone who wandered too far from the mothership and won't be back in time to catch the last flight out. I have begun to doubt what philosophers call first principles, defined as those that cannot be deduced from any other. These are foundational assumptions, a priori truths, axioms in mathematics. It was Aristotle who formulated the first principle, the tautology denoted as A equals A. I have always had some difficulty distinguishing optimism from fantasy, and chose as my first principle the metaphysical certainty that everything would work out because I was doing the right thing. Of course, my wife, who has significantly more experience in such matters, told me differently. Of course, I didn't listen. A year ago, my wife and I moved to these mountains to run a dog sanctuary. We specialize in dogs with special needs, the very old, the very sick, the really retarded. Many of the animals we take in will need years of work before they are eligible for adoption. Many will never be eligible. We believe that how an animal dies is important, So we've become purveyors of a few great months and a very good death. Not many rescuers do this sort of hospice work, as most find it too trying. My wife is tough enough to take it. My excuse is a predilection toward risk and a history of lucky, which, I assumed, would have some predictive value. Let's just say, in this case, A did not equal A. One of the lucky things I assumed had predictive value was that my first year and a half in this cause had been remarkably death-free. Dogs would arrive in our care in dire shape, with dire warnings. 3 weeks to live, a month at most. But there is a difference between how long a dog is supposed to live and how long that dog does live, and in a great many cases that difference is my wife. Again, she tried to tell me otherwise. Again, I didn't listen. By February 2008, I developed a false sense of confidence, which was about when the universe decided to make up for lost time. We now have a small pet cemetery in our backyard. The graves are laid out in a line. If I stand directly in the center of them, my best friend's grave is 2 to my left, my wife's best friend 2 to my right. We lost a lot of love that winter. 7 dogs total. 7 dogs dead in 7 weeks. Vinny was among them. He was a schnauzer, sweet and old and prone to the shivers. Once the winter arrived, we began wrapping him in comforters and sweaters and anything else we could think of to keep him warm. After we buried him, I couldn't shake the concern. 2 nights ago, my wife found me standing above Vinny's grave with a blanket in one hand and a shovel in the other. When she asked me what I was doing there, I told her what was most likely the truth, that I didn't really know. Judging by appearances, my plan was to dig up his body and wrap him up tighter. "You know he's dead, right?" she asked after a while. "Uh-huh," I said. I was worried he was cold. There's a small cherry tree shading our graveyard. I remember how hopeful we felt when we planted it. Our world was shiny and new back then. Nothing was irrevocable. Everything was possible. I had not yet concluded that the bet I could not cover involved my own happiness, as I had not yet come to understand that the life I was living was, in fact, real. My wife laid the shovel beneath the cherry tree, took my hand, and led me toward the house. "It's late. Why don't you come back to bed?" She was about to tell me that everything would be better in the morning, but I watched her swallow those words. She's a realist. It's been a very long time since anything was better in the morning. Part 1. Walking on Water Wasn't Built in a Day. Jack Kerouac. Chapter 1. Not too long ago, I took all the money I had in the world and bought a postage stamp of a farm in Chimayo, New Mexico. It was an impulse buy. I didn't know much about country living, had never entertained secret pastoral fantasies. One moment I was a money-grubbing bastard, the next a guy negotiating for a donkey. Sure, there was the recent conclusion that nothing in common remained between the life I had imagined and the one I was leading, but did farm animals solve this particular problem? It wasn't much of a problem, just another existential crisis in the early spring of 2007, and they were in fashion that year. It was the season of nowhere to hide. The economy was lousy, the ice caps melting. There were water wars on the horizon, and oil wars underway, and those bees kept dying. Global pandemic came back on the menu. We were freakishly short of food. And this, the experts said, was just the warm-up round. The term scientists have coined for our current planetary die-off is the 6th Great Extinction. I couldn't remember ever not feeling tired. All that seemed clear was that at some point we had butchered the job and begun to call up, down, and right, left, and just about everybody I knew could no longer find their way home. Like others, I had learned the necessary stagecraft. During my waking hours, I was a competent enough act as far as such things were concerned, a journalist by trade, a taker of notes, meetings, and an acceptable level of non-prescription pharmaceuticals, a waterer of house plants, fully capable of handling most cutlery, able to recall Spencer Tracy's advice on thesping, remember your lines and don't walk into the furniture, during those times of need. As I turned 40 that year, there had been plenty of times of need. In 4 decades I'd managed to accumulate some hard facts, but little true wisdom. I can say for certain that the 5th great extinction was the one that killed off the dinosaurs, but didn't think to ask anyone a question about Chimayo before moving there. I was unaware that my new home sits in the heart of the Espanola Valley, and that the Rio Grande Sun is the newspaper that serves that valley. I did not know that the Sun's weekly police blotter had lately become something of a national amusement. Jay Leno liked the woman who smuggled heroin inside a burrito to her boyfriend in jail. National Public Radio liked the man in a white Dodge chasing people around with a sword, and the guy wearing a blue sweater and blue pants talking to the robotic horse in front of the grocery store, and the one who challenged his entire family to a fight and was presently hitting his mother. It had also escaped notice that Chimayo has one of the highest rates of drug addiction in the country, and that a significant portion of the local population was arrested in September 1999 when Operation Tar Pit swept through town. Nor did I hear the August 18, 2005 NPR broadcast that included the commentary of local clean living activist Dr. Fernando Bayardo, who pointed out that such abuse had been entrenched in this area for over 50 years. You have a grandmother shooting up with a grandchild. You have family members shooting up together. It's not something the teenage son hides from other family members. How are you going to change those unhealthy lifestyles and habits and develop new norms? I had no idea how to develop new norms. All that was certain was that my girlfriend and I had been thrown out of our house in Los Angeles with no other options beyond the just plain dumb. In our case, the just plain dumb was deciding to bet everything on a bunch of dogs and a pie-in-the-sky list of homesteading desires. The dogs we'll get to in a moment. The desires were organized into a wish list of sorts, written the night after we'd learned we were being booted in a state of not-so-quiet desperation. A number of the items on that list were critical. My girlfriend had lupus. I had Lyme. Together, we were 2 tenors with multiple sclerosis shy of an autoimmune quartet. We needed long days of brilliant sunshine because we needed to walk. Few zoning restrictions and lots of space were also important because we had a bunch of animals and plans for more. Unfortunately, what we didn't have was all that much money. The only location in America that fit all our desires was Santa Fe, New Mexico, but Santa Fe was nearly as expensive as Los Angeles. Maybe an outlying community that had escaped the housing boom was the pipe dream. Oprah Winfrey had a $10 million mansion in the only outlying community we'd heard about, so maybe this was the crack pipe dream. There were 40 items on our wish list. We had the budget for 10. The thing about Chimayo, we got 39. I should have known there was a pretty good reason for this, but by the time that puzzle was solved, talking to a robotic horse in front of the grocery store made as much sense as anything else I could think up. Chapter 2. About 6 weeks before I bought the farm, I decided that life weighed too much. So I gave away 3,000 books, 6 garbage bags of clothing, 4 bookcases, 3 chairs, 3 backpacks, 2 tables, 2 pairs of skis, 2 surfboards, 2 computers, an old skateboard, a torn tent, a packed filing cabinet, a small comic book collection, some entomological gear left over from the bug collecting phase, a bit of pornography, 2/3 of everything by the end. I had decided to move in with my girlfriend. She lived in a very small house. My girlfriend's name is Joy. Her small house sat just south of the Santa Monica Mountains, just north of Hollywood in the township of Los Feliz. 2 words that translate from Spanish to English as the Happy. Nearby is the Griffith Park Observatory, the Greek Theater, and the 3,000 other acres that collectively make up Griffith Park. The park was bequeathed to the city of Los Angeles in December 1896, a sort of Christmas present from the appropriately named Griffith J. Griffith. His gift came with only one condition. It must be made a place of recreation and rest for the masses, a resort for the rank and file, for the plain people. We were the plain people, and for a short while we lived in the Happy. Our house was rented, cheap, possibly haunted, and measured out to exactly 666 square feet. It perched atop a steep cliff, surrounded by a dense thicket of tall trees. Inside, a small living room gave way to a smaller bedroom, and on into a kitchen the size of a ship's galley. Everywhere the paint peeled and pipes broke. There were cracks in the walls, holes in the floor, and doors that wouldn't quite shut. Even the stairs leading up that cliff were not much more than a makeshift ladder of rotting wood. But life at the top was quiet and calm, and the living room was a wall of windows. We had fallen in love looking out those windows, looking at our view of the Happy. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "There is more to life than increasing its speed," and while I agree completely, 2 weeks after Joy and I moved in together, we moved out together. There was no other choice. Our landlord had bought too many properties back when the getting was good. In person, he'd told us ours was the last he'd planned on developing. 2 years at least, and a 6-month warning before I give you the boot, was what he'd said. We'd been going on faith here, as none of this was in writing. In writing was an already expired lease, followed by a month-to-month contract. That contract gave us 30 days to vacate, and no recourse. When we mentioned lawyers, he mentioned the ASPCA. That, as they say, was the end of that. Our problems were more than a few. The first was simple economics. We were broke. Certainly I had the money to buy that house in New Mexico, but that was the entirety of my savings account, and we'd been living off that savings account for much of the past year. We were both writers. The magazine industry was in the tank, and the publishing industry wasn't far behind. It was a silly time to try to make a living out of words, but it was a silly time in general. Anyway, our real problem was the dogs. The reason we lived in a broken-down house atop a steep cliff was that that house came with an exceptionally large yard and exceptionally few neighbors, and we needed both because there are 7 animal shelters in Los Angeles and dozens more in surrounding communities. At capacity, the bigger ones hold about 200 animals, and they're almost always at capacity. There's only one way to make more space. Canines may be man's best friend, but most of these shelters still have 90% kill rates. They euthanize more than 1,000 dogs a month in the City of Angels, and Joy spent much of her time trying to even those odds. Dog rescue involves plucking a dog off death row in the hopes of eventually finding the animal a home. Most of these animals arrive in pretty poor shape. Rehab takes months of hard work. It often takes thousands of dollars in medical care, much of which comes out of the rescuer's pocket. Occasionally, after all that, some of these dogs end up too sick or too difficult to be adoptable. Dog rescuers call these lifers. In my late 20s, an old girlfriend awoke one morning to end our relationship. "I want 8 kids. You don't want any," was her reasoning. Well, I couldn't fault her logic. She'd long known of my antipathy toward children. It had taken her over a year to realize there was no changing my mind. Not much later, for advertising purposes, I printed up a T-shirt reading, "Dogs, not kids." I still feel that way, but lifers add a whole other dimension to the equation. Years back, Joy had started out rescuing English bull terriers. For those unfamiliar, these are squat white beasts created by some 18th century madman intent on crossing a bulldog, a pit bull, and a Dalmatian. They were bred for bull baiting, a process that involved leaping at the underbelly of a bull, clamping jaws to testicles, and applying something like 1,600 pounds per square inch of pressure to said testicles. Eventually the bull fell down. Then the dog released the balls and tore out the throat. Until it was outlawed in 1835, this is what passed for fun in Britain. Afterward, bull terriers became fighting dogs, meaning they were still bred for aggression. Their albino coats are highly prized, but the inbreeding required for such coloration leaves them with compromised immune systems and limited social skills. They also have an extremely short intestinal tract, which leads to bad digestion and worse gas. The results are an aggressive, easily agitated, stubborn, single-minded fireplug of a fart machine so damn macho that the only other dogs Joy's Bull Terrier wouldn't attack on sight were Chihuahuas. Thus, she had 5 of them. And there was also some kind of Dachshund-Beagle hybrid, and then my half-husky, half-Rottweiler got added into the mix. We totaled out at 8, and they were all lifers. This was a little tricky since Los Angeles's canines per household law specifies 3 as the legal limit. Trying to find a landlord willing to bend this rule under the best of circumstances was difficult. Then the real estate market stalled, and the rental market soared. The city's occupancy rate stood at 96%. Under such conditions, finding an affordable apartment that took 8 dogs was right up there with world peace and ample legroom in coach class on the list of things that weren't going to happen any time soon. It was a Sunday when we found out our house was being sold. I came back from running errands to find Joy crying on the couch. She told me the landlord had dropped the hammer, and then told me she had made a decision. She was moving to Mexico, where life was cheap and they didn't care how many dogs one owned. I had no desire to live in Mexico. I had no chance to revive my career in Mexico. This wasn't, it is worth pointing out, her first choice. It was her last chance. She knew I couldn't move to Mexico with her, but it had taken over 2 years of constant looking to find our small house, and we didn't have 2 years. We had less than a month, and almost no money. She couldn't stand the thought of being a burden. "You want a life in the city, a great career, and you're not going to get that with me and my dogs." All of which might be true. It was also true that I didn't want those things anymore. What I wanted was to feel like something in this world mattered, even if it had been a long time since that had been the case. What was the case was that I've been downright silly for Joy ever since the day we met. I gave away a lot of stuff to move in with her, and, truthfully, it all could have gone. Most days my gal and her dogs were the only things around worth keeping. So no, none of us were going to Mexico, though all of us were going somewhere. That much for sure. Chapter 3. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons, are 9 words that T.S. Eliot once wrote. During the period of time I'm talking about, I would often repeat these words to myself as some kind of talisman, meant to ward off, well, I was never quite sure. They were often stuck in my head when I was stuck in traffic, among the 100-foot billboards, the $1,000 haircuts, the everybody with their shopping bags, the endless repetition of strip malls and strip clubs and suntans, this whole mad crush that was often Los Angeles. These words were my way of putting into perspective the feeling that had become much of my day. I was 40 years old and no longer sure my life meant much of anything. I had come into adulthood equipped with the essentially romantic delusion that life would get easier. It had not gotten easier, but had gotten something. I began making choices. I gave up cooking for 30 seconds in the microwave. I wrote books, but stopped reading. I missed the days when the drugs did the work. I wasn't unhappy so much as unsure. Just the constant sensation that whatever else might be true, this was definitely not what I'd ordered. It was a time when I wasn't alone in questioning the way I was living. Joy and I had been having philosophical differences. When being polite, we called these differences art versus altruism. We were not always polite. I believed in creativity, the act of making something from nothing, the high-minded transfer of inspiration, and other such claptrap. She felt the making of art was inherently selfish, and instead trumpeted the quiet generosity of laying it all on the line for every blessed creature. It doesn't sound like much of a fight, but it was. What seemed to be at stake was the best way to live in the world. What was really at stake was the best way to live together. Dog rescue is often emotionally exhausting and physically time-swallowing, while freelance writing is more of the same. Love doesn't always hold up under those conditions. Joy's had both ex-boyfriends and ex-husbands grow jealous of her dogs, which helps explain how they became exes, while I hadn't managed a long-term relationship in decades. Then there was our financial future. Neither of our causes came with a great paycheck, a downside I combated with the traditional metaphysics. Do what you love and the rest will follow. But with both of us doing what we loved, would the rest really follow? And if one of us had to get a real job? Since her higher calling involved living creatures, and mine involved putting words together in a straight line, common sense said I should be the one to make the sacrifice. Unfortunately, in my experience, common sense and higher callings are contradictions in terms. It was into this debate that a dog named Damien arrived. He was not much over 10 pounds, flea-bit, and back-broke. His entire life had been spent tied to a radiator, his home range a 2-foot patch of hard-packed dirt, his collar a thin metal chain dug so deep into his flesh it required surgery to remove. There were plenty of available comforts lying around. Damien was past the point of available comforts. For his first 3 months with us, he stayed beneath the house, living inside an old truck tire, trying to kill anything that came close. And more, I was coming around to his perspective. It was clearly time for a change. Joy's side of the argument hinged on the crucial fact that, besides doing animal rescue, she was also a writer, with 2 books to her name, and more success than had ever come my way. She had lived the art and preferred the altruism. Until I'd done the same, in her opinion, my opinion remained suspect. Now wait just a minute, I tried to protest. I definitely have some experience with altruism. Which is? Like everybody else who backpacked through Asia after college, I had sex with a Peace Corps volunteer. Uh-huh, she said. Absolutely, that counts. So I guess you could say that when I traded 40 years of the most ordinary for a world made of dog, I was trying to prove her wrong, or me right, or something else entirely. Turns out it was something else entirely. But what that something is a bit of a longer story. Chapter 4. Chimayo has always been a place people came to in times of confusion and despair, though sometimes their arrival was not entirely voluntary. Its earliest inhabitants were outlaws, sent to this backwater as punishment. The town began in 1680, established as a penal colony for the Spanish Empire, and has never completely escaped this past. It sits 30 miles north of Santa Fe in the middle of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains on what is locally considered the high road to Taos. The high road also turns out to be something of an apt moniker, as Chimayo is further known for being the black tar heroin overdose capital of these United States and, well, for miracles. Those overdoses occur at 4 times the national average. Those miracles occur at El Santuario, a small church said to be the Lords of America. Lourdes is the spot in southwestern France where the Virgin Mary appeared to Saint Bernadette in 1858.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?